Hello, everyone. Let's give everyone another minute or so to hop on, and then we can get started. Mm, It looks like it's slowing down a little bit with people jumping on. So I'll go ahead and get started with the intro. Hello, everyone, and welcome to what the proposed billion-dollar SNAP cuts will mean for the farm communities. Hosted by the Food Research and Action Center, uh, and the Center for Science and Public Interest. My name is Whitney, and I am the digital media coordinator here at FRAC, aka I do a lot of the social media stuff, and I'm excited to be here with y'all today. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 60 minutes, so an hour. We are recording this presentation and we'll send y'all the recording and slides in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available. To turn on captions, click Show Captions in the bottom taskbar and select English as a spoken language or whatever you speak. After the presentation, we'll have time for questions and answers. To ask a question at any time, please use the Q&A feature, which is also located in the bottom taskbar. With that, I'll pass it over to Gina, SNAP Deputy Director at FRAC. Take it away, Gina.
Thank you so much, Whitney, and thank you all of you who are here today. Want to acknowledge that we are facing an incredibly fight, and all of you have so many things on your hands. And so we thank you for taking the time to understand the impacts that this will have on our broader community, because SNAP doesn't operate in a vacuum. Next slide. I don't need to tell you this, but we all know the major impacts that SNAP has within our economy, everything positive that it does. But we're here today because some policymakers have forgotten that very real truth of what it is. So where we stand is, a few weeks ago, the House voted right along party lines to move the big awful bill over to the Senate. So the Senate has been deliberating to see what sort of cuts, if any, it should make. And I want to hone in on that, because it doesn't mean there have to be any cuts whatsoever. We're going to see things along the party lines, but there are still opportunities to push back, because at the core is this false argument that the federal deficit, right? It stems from these anti-poverty programs, like the programs that support our working class, our low-wage individuals, SNAP, and other programs that are also on the line. But the real cost, if we look at it, next slide, is decades of tax cuts that have favorably benefited the wealthy and large corporations. And when we think of wealthy, again, 1%, the top 1%, right? Billionaires and large corporations who have really benefited from these tax cuts. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because the Bush era, we saw different tax cuts in the Bush era, and we were able to fight off any cuts to SNAP, right? We protected categorical eligibility. We actually were able to put some protections for legal permanent residents. They were able to do their tax cuts, which now we're seeing the results, right? We have a fiscal deficit, and we don't have the revenue to sort of address this. But cutting essential programs is not the answer, right? So just remember that. The 2000s, the 8 years that we had of the Bush administration, of almost 8 years of a GOP trifecta, we were able to push back against any cuts. And that is incredibly pivotal as we look again, 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And that's the image that you're all looking at right now in the lawn, and you can see Mr. J.J. Thompson back there. This is again, they were celebrating this tax cuts, which again, 1.7 trillion that it cost our country. The Bush cuts were 8 trillion. And to benefit some of the wealthiest, which was this one of the reasons that we see the economic disparity. And so that's what we need to address. And now we're looking at 4 trillion more of expenses at the cost of what? Are these programs that we know that do work, that do help eliminate poverty. And this is important because, again, 2017, the early 2000s, we beat up any cuts, and we can do so again. these large, we're going to walk really briefly as to like what is at stake. For those of you who may not know where we are, which is, the bill's going to restructure from we know from the House and what the Senate may be considering. But keep in mind, none of this has to happen. We can push back like we did in the 2000s and in 2017. The bill wants to restructure the way SNAP is funded. So today, SNAP operates as a federal entitlement where the government covers 100% of the food benefits, right? Those food benefits go straight into individuals' pockets, which goes into the local economy, and it has great impacts. We've done a webinar on this. And currently, that's 100% covered by the federal government, and then 50% equally of administrative costs by the state and the federal government. The new proposal will shift this, where states will be required to pay at least 5% up to 25% of the benefit costs, depending on their error rates. And on top of that, they will shift administrative cost from 50% to just 25%, meaning that states will be responsible for up to 25%, and a large majority of states will be under that category, on top of 75% of administrative costs. This will cause a massive cost burden onto states, and not just states, because remember, states are here, but our local municipalities who have even less resources, because resources trickle down, and the more at the bottom you are, the less resources you get. And this will be incredibly harmful, especially during times of economic downturn when SNAP participation is likely to rise. And that's the thing about SNAP. SNAP mirrors poverty and it mirrors the economy. The more unemployment, the more poverty there is, the more SNAP enrollment it is. SNAP enrollment decreases when the economy is stable. And we saw that after the recession. We saw that the SNAP enrollment decrease. So what are states going to have to do? They're going to have to make impossible choices. They're going to have to raise taxes, yes, property taxes, or they're going to have to cut other critical services, or they're going to have to reduce SNAP eligibility. That means cutting millions of people from food and essential needs that they're going to need to just live. And it's not just that we're talking about here. We also have Medicaid, we also have education. There is just a terrible push to just undermine programs that really work. And what that will do is that it will leave families, especially those already struggling, without the support they need. There are other provisions in the bill that I'll go really quickly on, but we'll follow up with reports that we've written on this. But the Thrifty Food Plan, which is the basis of the SNAP benefit amount, they will make sure the proposal is that it will stay cost neutral. So that means that SNAP benefits will not keep pace with actual food prices, and it will erode the program's value over time. It expands time limits, these awful time limits from the age of 54 to 64. And it will also restrict as to who qualifies as a caregiver, and will cap who's a dependent child to those who are over 7. It will reduce the state's ability to waive requirements in high unemployment areas, and it will put more older adults and struggling caregivers at risk of losing access to food. There's also the utility deduction restrictions, which will be just capped for older adults or people with disabilities. There'll be a zero tolerance policy on state error rates. There'll be the elimination of SNAP-Ed. There are just so many terrible things going down the pipeline. And again, this is not happening in a vacuum. There are other programs that are also being harmed or potentially to be harmed. And these changes will reverberate through our economy, affecting local grocers, schools, farmers, our state budgets, our municipalities' budget. And we cannot afford any of these cuts, and we don't have to. That's why I started with that picture. We don't have to do that for the benefit of the 1%. We can say no to these cuts. There's no negotiating. We don't have to negotiate one provision after the other. We don't have to negotiate one program after the other. These programs work. They support our local economy. They support our workforce. They support our American people, and they should be protected. So now you are going to hear how these changes, we talked about various vacuums, how they look like on the ground on individuals and local farmers, because one of the things that people really love of the most things that the SNAP program does is these incentive programs. It's called various things in different states, whether it's double up bucks, where it's called the healthy incentives programs. Various states operate in a different way. And some of these partners are our local farmers, the local farmers who are feeding our communities. And today we have a great panel who are going to talk about our food system, how this will impact the farm community, rural communities, how it will impact our food system. And the first person to get us started is Ben Feldman. He is the policy director at Farmers Market Coalition. He is also the co-founder of Indirect Rates Consulting and the former executive, I apologize, and the former executive director of the National Farmers Coalition, where he was specifically responsible for program development, partnership, cultivation, policy engagement, and strategic planning. As a consultant, Ben specializes in advising on executive leadership, policy, government grants, as well as organizational and strategic planning. Ben, thank you so much for being with us. We know you're incredibly busy. You're also in another time zone, so thank you for being here with us. And can you set the stage and let us know, what role do farmers markets play in supporting our local farmers and food access? And how would these SNAP cuts threaten that system?
Thanks, Gina, and thanks for that excellent overview. I think the way you framed this is really important. The fact that we're not talking about these snap cuts in a vacuum. We're talking about what are we trading for SNAP and these other programs. And you're talking about cuts, or we're talking about SNAP tax cuts for the wealthy. We can go to my first slide. What I want to emphasize here is that there has been a tremendous amount of work that has happened over the years in order to make sure that farmers who sell at farmers markets are able to participate and accept SNAP on behalf of their communities, and in order to ensure that participants who shop at who shop with SNAP dollars are able to do so at retailers of their choice, including farmers markets. So if we can go to this first slide, what you'll see here is a graph that shows the impact of the move to the electronic system, the EBT system that is now in place for the SNAP program. For those of you who are old enough to remember, the program used to be called, we used to call it we used to call it food stamps. So we don't call it that anymore, but the point here is that as we moved from the food stamp program, which were quite literally food stamps, vouchers that people could use, they'd bring to the farmer's market, they'd hand it to the farmer would then take it to the bank, and the bank would process it for them. Real simple to do in a farmer's market setting as well as a grocery store setting. But what happened in the late 90s, states were required to transition from paper food stamps to the electronic benefit transfer system. And in doing so, it made it extremely difficult for farmers who sell at farmers markets, roadside stands, farm stands, and other ways directly to the public. Made it extremely challenging for them to process the electronic system. And so what you see in this graph is a real decline in spending at farmers markets and with direct marketing farmers, small scale farmers who are operating independently, who don't necessarily have access to the same resources and the same market outlets as larger farmers who may sell through more traditional channels. And that happens through the late 90s into the early 2000s when every state finally moved to the EBT system. And it really isn't until we get into the mid to late 2000s where there are active efforts to bring back the ability of SNAP to be processed by farmers who sell at farmers markets. And that includes equipment access, it includes outreach and education, and it includes, as we move later into the decade, programs like the Double Up Food Bucks programs, these incentive programs that help incentivize the consumption of fruits and vegetables, in particular with farmers who are selling at farmers markets. And if we can go to the next slide. So this first slide took us through about 2014, and the numbers there were on a percentage basis, so comparing total SNAP spending to spending at farmers markets. This slide here shows these numbers in total dollars. And what you can see is that over the decade between 2013 and 2023, a over 400% increase in SNAP dollars spent at farmers markets. So in 2023, where the last time we have data, you can see $70 million in SNAP was spent at farmers markets directly with American farmers. And this is a significant amount of money for these farmers. This is not pocket change, and this is their livelihood. We spent, as you can see, decades putting in intentional efforts in order to make sure that both SNAP shoppers had choice, that they were able to spend their money where they chose to, and that farmers who sold at farmers markets, American farmers, were not left out of the ability to receive those benefits, receive that money, that additional money that grocery stores have always been able to, and there's no guarantee of where that produce is coming from, right? Why would we deprioritize small scale, independent American farmers, the people who really, when we speak about food in this country, we always talk about, and yet we're by and large left out of this system for many years. And not to say the system is perfect, but we are talking about $70 million. And so the proposed SNAP cuts amount to approximately 25% of total SNAP spending. So what we're talking about is we're talking about asking farmers who have significant amounts of SNAP spending coming to their market to reduce their income by 25%. And to give you what we would be asking, if to Gina's point, these cuts are not they're not guaranteed, and we can bite them off, right? There is no reason why they have to happen, except that billionaires in this country want to make a little more money, right? If we can go to the next slide, I'll give you a specific example. A farmer's market not too far from me, the heart of the city farmer's market in San Francisco. That market processed in 2023 $2.57 million in SNAP plus incentives with 30 farmers. So if we're talking about a 25% cut, what that amounts to is per farm a $25,000 cut in their income each year. And I don't know about you, but my household couldn't withstand a cut of $25,000. These farmers can't withstand that. This will result very directly and clearly in loss of jobs, farm closures, and the inability of customers who rely on SNAP to purchase groceries at farmers markets, not just having their benefits reduced, but we will see farmers go out of business as a result of these cuts. It is serious, it is significant, and the ripple effect of this doesn't even take into account the ripple effect of some of these impacts on other affiliated programs and downstream impacts. So for that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Lene, who's going to speak to you a little bit about some of those ripple effects from these SNAP cuts.
Thank you, Ben, for that overview, because while you spoke about it, it's very specific. We know that across the nation, these are very real things. We'll send in some resources where we've heard from other farmers in Kansas and Arizona, where it's 17% of their base. And if this is cut, their business, their livelihood will also be impacted, and their ability to feed the community. Lene, thank you so much for joining us. Lene is the policy associate at the Center for Science and the Public Interest, where she advocates for policy to improve food security, reduce barriers to SNAP, and strengthen programs like GovSNP. Previously, she was at Virginia Fresh Match, a statewide nutrition incentive program. Lene, like Ben said, how do these incentive programs support farmers and families, and what risk do these cuts propose to the future?
Great. Thanks so much, Gina. And thanks, Ben, for that excellent overview of, the scope of SNAP at farmers markets. I'm here to ask, how can we take those benefits that are supporting our local farmers and take them even further? And that's really where nutrition incentives come into play. We often call nutrition incentives a triple win or a multi-win for our farmers and communities, because they are really the main mechanism that we can use to make fruits and vegetables more affordable for people with low incomes, including including SNAP shoppers, participants in the WIC and senior farmers market nutrition programs, and so forth. We also know that nutrition incentives are proven to work. They are successful at getting people not only to shop for local food. I am the biggest proponent of local food. I love local food. I love farmers markets. And we know when these incentives are available, people will go shop there. They'll buy more fruits and vegetables, but they're also eating more fruits and vegetables. And that also has an impact on their household food security status. They're getting higher quality food. They're becoming less reliant on highly processed food, and they're able to stretch their food supply longer. And then here, today we're really, trying to underscore the benefit of this expansion of revenue for our farmers and our local farming communities. Next slide, please. Nutrition incentives operate in a lot of different ways, and so I just want to provide a quick overview of some of the main nutrition incentive programs and how those are funded. So you all are probably most familiar with programs that are funded under the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program, also called GusNIP. In terms of brands, you see those programs as Double Up Food Bucks, such as Double Up Food Bucks Texas, SNAP Stretch in West Virginia, and also the Market Match program in California. So depending on where you live, they go by different names. This program is funded through the federal farm bill at a mandatory appropriation of $75 million a year. However, that money is used in a competitive grant process. As a former GusNIP grantee, I can tell you those grants are not easy to get. They are very competitive, and they require a 50% cost share with the federal government. So that essentially means that your program or your organization has to be ready, willing, and able to match the federal government dollar per dollar. As you can imagine, that presents barriers for a lot of organizations who are under-resourced. And that's why state funding is also critical for GusNIP. Many programs are able to get written into the state budget, and they use those state dollars to match the federal. So it really helps them unlock those federal funds. We've also seen some more innovative type of models with incentives using better technologies. So most programs at farmers markets operate on a token or like a coupon, like voucher system. However, Massachusetts was a pioneer in getting an EBT integrated model. So that means that nutrition incentives are earned directly back onto an EBT card. This program was funded historically at $25 million a year under the Massachusetts state government, and that funding was cut in the last cycle down to $15 million a year. However, they have demonstrated that they can redeem a whole lot of incentives with farmers. So all of their program focuses on farmers and farmers markets, over $82 million of incentives redeemed. That program really set the stage for something called the Electronic Healthy Incentives Program, which is a pilot that is currently being operated across 3 states, Washington, Colorado, and Louisiana. This is a USDA cooperative agreement program. These pilots are honestly in the works now. Some are a little further along than others, but the funding for that does expire in 2027. As an advocate for incentives, I'm concerned about that because if we see these technology innovations as a way forward, we need to know everything we can about how well that's working in those pilot states. And then lastly, we have the WIC and Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Programs, which offer seasonal benefits, which has really limited their expansion because the funding for those are just not enough at the federal level. However, we know from evaluation data that both WIC and Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program participants love using those programs. They love shopping at farmers markets, and the senior program in particular has a really high redemption rate. Next slide, please. So just to underscore like some of the main benefits of these programs, focusing in on GusNIP. So GusNIP really is a proven program that works. It has a very robust evaluation behind it that's conducted by the Center for Nutrition and Health Impact. That they collaborate with organizations to collect a whole lot of data. I've been involved in GusNIP evaluation, and it's very robust, and it also demonstrates a very high economic impact. So thinking about the program as a whole, last reported was over $107 million in economic impact, about 44 million of that going directly to our smaller farmers. Next slide, please. Also, we know that people love going to farmers markets, and that really drives them to redeem their SNAP incentives. So you can see that there's a big difference here in redemption rates when thinking about shopping at farmers markets versus brick and mortar stores. Next slide. And also, we know that participants who shop with SNAP incentives are, eating a little bit more fruits and vegetables than people who shop predominantly at brick and mortar stores or other types of retail sites. Next slide. And then lastly, we know that people love these programs. I think one of the biggest, encouraging thing that comes out of this evaluation every year is that people have a super positive experience. So you can see that about 93% of people here in the last evaluation reported either a positive or a very positive experience. And I think there's something to that. One, farmers markets give us a chance to go out and shop in our local community, get to know our farmers, know where our food's coming from. It offers that, that social time that people aren't always able to access. But in addition, I think this sort of, flies in the face of, these misconceptions about SNAP shoppers only wanting to eat, unhealthy food. Because we know when they have these benefits, they are willing to go out and support the local community. They are, really appreciative that they're able to buy such high quality produce. We know that the produce at farmers markets is better than, food that's been on a truck for 2 weeks before it gets to the grocery store. And that definitely, the quality, the variety, all those things are, of interest for SNAP participants. Next slide, please. And last, I'll just, wrap up here with some of the points that Ben made. Any cut to the SNAP program is absolutely going to trickle down to our incentive programs. And I'm particularly worried about the state cost share. So if states are having to pay for a share of the benefits, they're going to be much less likely to support incentive programs. So it's going to become harder for people like me who work with states to get them into the governor's budget. It's going to be much harder to convince them to back those programs if they're already being burdened by paying for regular SNAP benefits. It's also going to make it harder for GusNIP grantees to come up with that cost share match. One way that is done is through state money, but also thinking about SNAP Ed. If there's a cut to SNAP Ed, oftentimes, SNAP Ed volunteer hours and things are used to provide GusNIP match. So that could have, there's a relationship there in terms of how grantees could be impacted. We also know that any type of funding decrease at this point puts all of these programs at risk. The GusNIP RFA is currently down. I saw something in the chat about that. And we are unsure of when it will be back up. However, those grants are supposed to start in September. Quite a few programs are running short on money. If they're unable to unlock new federal funds, they could be at risk of having to scale back their programs or even, permanently pause or close their programs. And that would be devastating. And that's something that, some programs have gotten close to doing even before we're talking about massive cuts to SNAP. And then, importantly, farmers are going to receive less income from SNAP shoppers. And as Ben mentioned, this could force some of our smaller farms out of business or even lead to some farmers market closures. And then, I think we all want SNAP shoppers to have the most options possible. And I personally want them to have the ability to shop for fresh local food. Everyone deserves that access to the best quality food out there. And we know our local farmers are the ones supplying that. And this could just ultimately reduce their purchasing power and limit their access to fresh, nutritious food. We see a lot of conversation now, at the state level and federal level around SNAP restrictions. Let's help, shift that conversation around to incentives. We need to enhance these incentive programs in order to make, these SNAP benefits stretch and work well for our participants and our farmers.
Thank you, Lene. And you touch on a very two good points that our friend Brad is going to really hone in, which is we love the opportunity, we love the SNAP programs, but states are not going to be able to innovate. They're not going to be able to support these issues if there are any cuts because they need to figure out where they're going to get these resources. And we have Brad with us who manages Brad St. Pierre is the Executive Director of Tanana Valley Farms and Market in Alaska. So thank you for joining us. He manages the Tanana Valley Farmers Market, is Alaska's oldest established farmers market showcasing Alaska-grown produce while also running Goose Food Farm focused on diversifying crops. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us what are the unique challenges faced by rural and remote farmers and consumers, and how would these snap cuts undermine progress?
Thanks, Gina, and thanks, Leanne and Ben, for getting that nationwide view of these effects of these cuts. I'm going to kind of dial down into what Alaska's impacts would be. If you want to go to our first slide, that's just a great picture. I hadn't seen that one in a while. So Alaska, the majority of our towns and villages are not accessible by road. So a lot of talk on the effects of these cuts around the country is talking about rural communities, but in Alaska, a lot of the discussions around remote communities. We've had kind of a porthole into what snap cuts would look like here in Alaska. Over the last few years, we've had a couple different backlog situations where beneficiaries over 3 months, over 6 months, were not getting their benefits distributed. And what we saw in remote Alaska is that many of these villages, well, many of them don't even have a store, and they have a hub community that does have a store where they all go to be able to use their SNAP benefits. And in those remote stores, we saw many of them struggling to stay afloat due to the lack of revenue from the loss of these beneficiaries' income. And when you're in a rural community in Alaska, though there are some corporate stores that have the ability to access or take SNAP payments online, many of these rural communities have no or little internet connection. And even if you were able to purchase from a larger store with your EBT from a rural community, you then have transportation costs that you can't use your EBT benefits for to transport. And from Fairbanks, which is farther north than Anchorage, even getting from here to a rural community, it costs about $1 a pound. So really closing off access entirely to food. And I think when we think about how these individual cuts affect our individual beneficiaries having zero access to food unless there's travel to a larger hub community can be devastating. You can go to my next slide. So if we go forward with these cuts, we would not be able to, oh, I just talked about the rural stores, but when we are working with EBT at farmers markets, like our farmers market, we have rural farmers markets, we have remote farmers markets. I believe if in Alaska, where 0.00% of our terrestrially grown food crops are exported, that if we're going to have a strong food system in Alaska, it needs to be accessible to everyone. And these double up bucks at farmers markets, or the ability to process EBT at farmers markets, is imperative for that our local community members have access to what is produced here in the state. From our largest farm in the state to the smallest, we all sell at farmers markets. In Fairbanks, the farmers market that I operate serves an area the size of the state of Indiana. So we have people coming from Healy, from Tok, Delta Junction, Nenana. We have people coming from Manly Hot Springs, all to this one hub community. The Alaska Farmers Market Association, through state grant, has been able to provide double up benefits for not only SNAP, but also WIC farmers market benefits. And this is hundreds of thousands of dollars that directly goes from beneficiaries to farmers. It is deeply held value in our country of this red barn and the family farm. And where you're going to find those farmers is at the farmers market. Alaska led the nation in new and beginning farmers over the last USDA agricultural census. And the majority of those new and beginning farmers are selling directly to consumers through farmers markets, CSAs, and farm stands, of which all of those locations could be able to process EBT and use our double up bucks. something was said earlier about how we know that local produced food is higher in nutrient value. You've got to think about how far anything from out of state is coming to come to Alaska. Well, currently over 95 or around 95% of the food that's consumed in Alaska is imported. So these farmers that we do have, it is a critical point to keep them in business. And for these young and beginning established direct-to-consumer farmers, having this double ups is a major economic driver for their farms. And we know that without them, we would definitely see less access and less of that success on the farm. And you can go to my next slide. Yep, so I was just talking about this, the 95% coming in from other places. And I see how SNAP affects our local community in a way that other programs have not, that people don't just come to the farmers market to feed their belly, they come to feed their soul. So including all of our community able to have the ability to come to one place to meet their community, to build that connection between themselves and the hands that produce it and the other community members is incredibly important to a healthy community financially and through community connections. And farmers markets are at the hub of that connection. So I was going to say one more thing about when farmers markets have the ability to stay around, the future of agriculture in that community has an option for a market. So young and beginning farmers know that there is a place that they can go no matter where they are and how they started. There will be a market for them. And it's important to have farmers who do that to be paid for the value of their work and still have all community members have access to that food. So I think it's important that we fight these cuts. I agree with Gina that we don't have to negotiate on how many or how much or what is cut. It's 4 senators that we need to vote against this bill. And our voices are important. And I hope to meet you all at the market if you're in Alaska.
Yeah, Brad. And Slaska, thank you for really making that point between remote and rural, because that is even more compounded. And Alaska has such a high error rate, and you just have so many issues that Alaska will be impacted. So thank you for sharing your point of view and how important the work that you do and feeding people. That to me was 400 miles. That is huge of what people will have to do and what this means. So it's really important for policymakers to hear that. And to keep really grounding us on what this means on day-to-day lives, our next speaker, Pauline Resco, who works at 7 Morning Farms in Arkansas, will tell us more about this issue. She has been working at Morning Farms for over many years, for over 25 years. She has helped local farmers secure funding, marketing, and distribution, and comes from a farming family. Pauline, if you can finish us off, and then we'll open it up for questions, is how do SNAP dollars directly support the small farmers in rural markets, and what will be the real world consequences of these proposed cuts?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me just fine?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. I was trying to share my screen with you also. So thank you for everybody participating today. My name is Pauline Rescorel. I work on a rural farm in Arkansas. It's a 78-acre farm. We do fruits, vegetables, chicken and duck eggs, transplants, wildcrafted, and foraged foods. I also manage a very rural farmers market in Eureka Springs, where we have really launched within the past 2 years, WIC, SNAP, and senior program, like matching programs, which has been really difficult. So just for some context, our market is located again, in Eureka Springs, but there's a population of 2,000, roughly. So within the past couple of years that we've been doing these programs, we've been able to distribute over $3,000 in WIC, SNAP, and senior matching funding. And this is considerable, given the fact that we have such a low population rate, such a low agriculture rate, and the reliance on these programs is paramount for us. We really could not navigate these services without the application of people who can supply us with WIC or SNAP or senior. And it's very difficult. Speaking from a rural perspective, there is a different way to navigate each one of these programs, which makes it extremely hard to do. And I do want to say that it's very difficult for rural markets and market managers. Some of us are paid, some of us are not paid. So some of it's completely voluntary. And we still have to go through all the paperwork. Like, for example, for the paperwork that I have to go through for the programs that we participate in, I have to fill out over like 39 fields of information just to comply with the programs, so that we can be able to match WIC, SNAP, and senior. So if we even lose the funding for this, like, which we kind of went through this past year, we didn't know for certain if we were going to be able to match these programs. So I had to go out of the box to try to find like matching funding. Like, if we don't have this access, we won't have the access for our rural communities. We won't have access to support our farmers. We won't have access to support our local food systems and networks. That's really imperative for what we're trying to do. So what we're doing right now, and again, maybe I should back up a little bit. Gina introduced me. My husband and I are farmers in a rural area of Arkansas. We have a certified naturally grown operation called 7 Mornings Farm. I've been in agriculture for over 20 years. I've worked with the Southern Sustainable Agriculture and Research Education Program. I won a national award for my work in sustainable agriculture, and I've been in front of Congress twice now. I'm also majoring in cooperative management with St. Mary's University. My husband is majoring in regenerative agriculture. So that's a brief rundown. That is to say that we're heavily involved in ways to connect our community with the resources available to them. And also be an advocate for the resources that we need, which is why I'm here today. So I really wanted to touch base a little bit with, like, Ben had commented in particular about, like, there's not much, I'm sorry, there's not much for reference for how we lose. And that's something that's really close to my heart, because we really don't know how much we would lose. At my farmer's market, for example, we, like I said, within 2 years, we were able to launch thousands of dollars in matching materials because people want to participate in this. And that's just astonishing to me. Like, we had little to no promotion. We just had people, like, it was literally just word of mouth.
Thank
And
you. Thank you,
streets,
Pauline, for that.
streets.
Sorry, can't hear. Thank you,
Oh,
Pauline,
no.
for that great overview of just the local impact and providing us just a wider view of what it's like to run this program, how difficult it is, and what the impact will have on your rural community in Arkansas. And again, none of this operates in a silo. There are many communities similar to the ones that are remote like Alaska, that are rural like Arkansas. And so we just want to make sure we have this information. I'm going to ask Whitney to please take down the PowerPoint slide, and I'm going to ask the folks to turn on their video camera. We have quite a bit of questions that I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to folks. Really quickly, I'll answer this, and then there's a couple of questions here for our panel. Yes, the slides will be shared. We'll follow up with the recording and this information. When we said about time limits, so currently, time limits were from 18 to 49, and since 1996, fiscal responsibility expanding that to those up to age 54. The new proposals want to expand that up to age 64, and on top of that, currently you are able-bodied adults without dependents, which again, that's a term that is not accurate. If you have a child within your household and child consider those under 18, you will be exempted. The new proposal says, hey, if you have a child who is under 8, then you are exempted. Anyone else is not, which is incredibly problematic, again, from the income base, what sort of job. People are working within time limits, right? Like, people are working. They just can't show enough hours. You know, you have to show at least 20 hours a week. And this is incredibly problematic, especially for women. Because we do know the majority of childcare is unpaid, and older women are one of the biggest unpaid. So, you know, we talked about this quite a lot, and we'll send the samples that we've done from FRAC, but, you know, grandma takes care of grandchild so that daughter can go to school. And this means that grandma can no longer provide that if she's within this age bracket, because, you know, child is 9 or 10 years old. So again, people who have more resources and can hire nannies can take the kids to school and can have all these other, or work from home remotely. Other people cannot do that. So we're highly concerned about any of these restrictions. On to the other questions that are from here is, I don't know if any of you have this, but one other question is, how can we find out our SNAP's impact on farmers market in our state? Not necessarily sure if that was like specific to the people here, or if you have like data specifically asking for our friends in Iowa.
That's a great question. And actually, I'm sure the folks at Double Up Iowa Healthy Estate Initiative could provide you with that data. The GusNIP community offers an economic impact calculator, and it's really awesome because you can plug in some numbers and it'll give you the economic impact of those incentives at the farmers market level. So I would definitely reach out to them. Brad and Ben, you might have some other thoughts too in terms of accessing that data.
Well, in Alaska, the Alaska Farmers Market Association is a resource that you can go to find out about our state. There's all sorts of SNAP infographics on our website, but for other states, I'm not exactly sure. I would say probably a state association would be a good place to start.
And USDA Food and Nutrition Service used to publish annual data broken down at the state level. They haven't done that in the last couple of years, but I will go ahead and see if I can track down the link for the latest data that was published and drop it in the chat here.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben, and thank you for taking these points and trying to speak to your elected official. And again, trying to back up a little bit. All these incentive programs, everything that our farmers are doing is great. They won't be able to do that if there are any cuts, right? And cuts are expansion to time limits because that means people are cut off the program. Cuts are any sort of funding toward USDA, right? Cuts are anything in that proposal that will make it a lot more difficult for individuals to access this program. And this is permanent, right? If this were to happen, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, again, they will come back and say, oh, well, we did it in the past. We're going to continue doing it. And just want to highlight 1996 that opened the door to time limits, making sure that people from 18 to 49 couldn't access SNAP, could only get SNAP for 3 months in a 3-year period. 2023 opened the door again and it like expanded. And here we go again, 2025. It's not even 54, now 64, and now is taking away the definition of what the dependent child it is. Thank you, Lene, for putting that in the chat as well. So just want to say that, again, all we need is forward to push back. The other data that folks are asking is, do we know what these proposed cuts from the House side will have hunger in rural communities? And all of you, Brad and Pauline, you touched in a little bit, but there is the specific data points where we can highlight what this means for rural communities.
Yeah. So for our rural communities, this is very difficult for us to navigate. Like trying to put together funding with resources is extremely difficult, especially when you're dealing with like a volunteer community. It makes it very hard. So having the funding come through with some support network is much more advantageous.
I just really quickly would say that, what's the other option? If these benefits are cut for EBT, our food access organizations around Alaska are slim to none. In our city, which is the second largest city in the state, there are 3 food access organizations who definitely cannot pick up the slack of what EBT benefits are currently providing for beneficiaries. So what are the other options? There aren't any really.
Thank you for saying that. And we've done other webinars where we invited the Small Retailers Association, which they operate a little bit different than farmers market. Some of them have 50% of their customer base as SNAP recipients. And similar to your farmers market, retailers operate in a very small margin. Again, not speaking of national retailers, more the mom and pop stores. If there are any SNAP cuts, these local retailers will close, which again will mean that people will have to travel a lot further out, but also means that the local taxes that this is producing and the people that they are hiring, the employment opportunities they are providing will be gone, right? So again, it's a snowball effect. It's a terrible cycle. And this is what we're going to see also in farmers markets, where like a big percentage of your customer base are rural, are SNAP recipients. The incentives is on top of that. And states will not be able to invest or support incentives programs if they have to figure out how they're going to pay for healthcare costs, how they're going to pay for food assistance costs. So just that large narrative. And thank you for putting the items on the chat. I think we have one more question, and then we're gonna give you time back. I think you answered in the chat already, Lene, about how to find out the information around incentives programs, but do you mind just saying that verbally and also talking briefly about the connection between SNAP-Ed and you did a
Sure,
good job.
yeah, sure. So I did put some resources in the chat. So if you're not sure who runs the SNAP Incentive GusNIP program in your state, you can look at that map. If you're lost, feel free to reach out to me. I can put my email in the chat. I know most of the GusNIP implementers, and I'm happy to always help put you in contact with them. I also link the GusNIP Year 4 findings. So if you just need more, data to prove the point that incentives are effective for farmers, they have a lot of great data there. Gina had also asked me to comment on the role that SNAP-Ed plays in GusNIP. SNAP-Ed being deleted in the budget is terrifying. My husband actually works for the North Carolina SNAP-Ed program, so this is near and dear to my heart. But also that SNAP-Ed implementing organizations often do partner with GusNIP grants. They do this in 2 main ways. One, local SNAP-Ed agents provide technical assistance to get farmers markets through the SNAP authorization process. So as Pauline mentioned, these paperwork processes are not always easy. They're confusing. All the programs want different things, and SNAP-Ed agents have played a role in supporting getting markets onboarded. But more importantly, they do provide nutrition education. Thinking about all this conversation around Make America Healthy Again, SNAP-Ed is working to do that, and they work in tandem often with our GusNIP grantees to offer even more robust nutrition education, even on site at farmers markets. So that program is absolutely critical. If it's cut, it's going to have a trickle down effect on our incentive programs, especially in terms of things like marketing, technical assistance, and onboarding. So I just can't say enough how important that program is, not just to GusNIP, but as a whole.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you everyone for joining us today. There were quite a lot of resources shared today. We'll try to compile them and put them all into a follow-up email. But like we just talked about, SNAP has a great economic impact. This isn't the first time that there has been a GOP trifecta in terms of trying to cut down and gut SNAP to give more funds to wealthy and large corporations. So again, we ask that all we need is 4, that magic number 4, to push back. We don't have to start negotiating about saving one part of the provision of the bill over the other. It will have terrible detrimental effects on our local economy, on our state economy, and this is permanent. Like we can't get that back. And CBO's, the Congressional Budget Office, has said this. These tax cuts, you can't keep asking and raising the debt ceiling when you don't have resources coming in. They're not fiscally responsible, particularly when you're cutting down the resources that help support Americans and his workforce. Again, so please, this is the time to reach out to your senator. It is incredibly important that they hear this back. This is going to go back to the House once the Senate decides what they're going to do. So even if you're like, oh, no, what do I do now? Contact your House member and let them know that they don't have to vote this. If they voted in the negative, they voted for it, say like, hey, you can still change your mind and do the right thing. And this is what we're asking for, to really do the right thing. There are multiple states, Carla. So we just need 4, right? Because Republicans have the numbers. So we can send you specific data on the key target places, but there are multiple Republicans, moderate Republicans that you can choose from. So thank you all for coming here today. Thank you to our panelists for the time and dedication and preparation that it took to be here, and to all of you joining us together today. Please utilize these talking points that, again, SNAP is a economic motor. It helps our local farmers. Everyone talks about local farmers. Keep supporting that and keep supporting our nutrition base. Thank you all so much.